Hello, my friends. Today I want to tell the story about this scary creature. What? No. This is not what I wanted to show my viewers. I don't know if you ever heard of this or not. The news about this bizarre event had spread all around my town, then spread to a few towns nearby. That, before federal cops and the government stopped it from spreading further. It all started when a 20-year-old girl, named Emma Dawn, came to the police in town to report her friends went missing after they went for camping and hunting in the woods in the outskirts of our town. The parents of her friends did report their children missing, so you can tell that they are actually missing, despite the extremely bizarre explanation that the girl gave to the police and the citizen. Her story sounded way too fantastic and unbelievable, so at first, people thought that she went crazy after what happened to them in the woods. Well, to the cops' and citizens' opinion, whatever that happened, it was definitely not like what she explained. This was what her explanation about her friends being missing: they were trapped in the woods in the cabin. Yeah, you read it right. According to Emma's explanation, it was the woods in the cabin. The bottom line of her story was that, when they were walking around the woods to hunt for deer or rabbit, they stumbled upon a small cabin in the middle of the woods. The cabin's design looked like it was designed for humans to live in, but the size of it was not. The size of the cabin looked like it was designed more like an animal shelter, though humans could enter its door by crawling through it. When Robbie, one of Emma's friends, opened the cabin's door, they were surprised to see there were other woods inside it. It looked like the inside of the cabin was a four-dimensional room to another woods somewhere. They entered the cabin one by crawling through the door. They left the cabin's door open, just in case. Inside the cabin, they saw many beautiful trees and flowers. Not long after, they heard the sound of an animal's breath near them. As they turned around, they saw something that looked like a huge werewolf, standing on its 2 feet, staring deeply at them. And the animal looked hungry. Following their instinct, they ran for their lives towards the cabin's door. Of course, the size of the door made them unable to go out all at once, and instead, had to crawl through. Emma was running in front of her friends, and successfully became the first to reach the door that was still open. She crawled through it, and when she got out, she accidentally kicked the door closed as she ran out. To her horror, when she turned her head to see her friends, she saw no cabin there. The cabin was gone. Suppressed by shock, panic, horror, and distress, Emma ran out of the woods and went back to town as fast as she could. That was all she could tell. She had no idea where that cabin had gone to, or where it brought her friends with. People thought she went crazy or delusional and didn't think of her explanation seriously. I mean, who would? To every sane people, her story would sound completely insane and unbelievable. Well, not until another group of kids went missing again after they also went for camping and hunting in the same woods. In less than 2 months, there are already 3 groups of people went missing after they went for camping and hunting in that woods, including Emma's. Cops and citizens started to think of Emma's explanation seriously. Her story might sound insane as hell, but to that point, that was the only thing that could explain the disappearance of those 3 groups of kids. Maybe not really a woods in the cabin, but there should be something horrible there in the woods. During a chat with one of the cops, who happened to be my father's friend, it was revealed that there were also cases of missing groups in the woods before. Like 8 cases. All happened in different towns, but all towns were closed to woods. Cops and people in town started to warn everyone to not enter the woods. They even built a fence and put a forbidden sign on its entrance. As you might guess, the curiosity took the best of me one day, and I decided to get into the woods to investigate it myself, along with my buddies, Billy and Kyle. It took us several days of visit to the woods, but there was no sign of anything strange. I was about to give up the investigation when my friend, Billy, said something that hooked me. Those groups that went missing. They went to the woods for camping and hunting, right? I mean, camping and hunting. They weren't here for a walk like we did. Right? Billy said. The three of us were staring at each other. We knew what was in each other's mind at the time, but none of us spoke it out. A few days later, we walked into the woods again. That time with the camping and hunting equipment. We spent 3 days camping in the woods. One day we actually did hunt. We got rabbits, so we decided to make a barbecue out of it while camping that night. Nothing strange happened that night. We, or at least me, started to think of our thoughts before we walked in with camping and hunting equipment. Maybe we were wrong. Maybe the hunting and the camping didn't have anything to do with the disappearance. Maybe even the so-called woods in the cabin itself was actually just a product of Emma's guilt from losing her friends. As we walked from our camping site to the border of the woods to get home, I heard Kyle, who walked behind me, and Billy, whispering. I sense a vibe of horror in his voice. Ah. Guys. I think I'll regret showing you this, but, isn't that, Billy and I turned our head back, to see Kyle staring at his left side with shock, surprise, and horror. We followed where his eyes went, and to our surprise, we saw a small cabin stood there, only 50 meters from us. From where we were standing, the cabin looked exactly like what Emma Dawn had described. We were staring at each other, and after a discussion, we decided to come close to the cabin. You wouldn't believe what we saw in the cabin after we opened its door. It was a woods. There was actually a woods in that cabin. Holy shit. Suppressed by both horror and curiosity at the same time, all of us wanted to get into the cabin to figure out what was inside. But knowing nothing about it, and added that to the story we had heard about it, none of us were dared to actually enter. We finally reached the deal that one of us will stay outside to keep the door open, and the other two will get in, to keep an eye on each other inside. Kyle was the one to stay outside and I and Billy would get in. Billy was the first to crawl inside, but he was about to be fully inside, he suddenly stopped. He stopped for a few minutes. Hey, dude, what's up? Why are you stopping? I asked. Guys, help me. Pull me out. Now. We gotta get out of here, Billy replied. What? But I thought. I hadn't finished my words when Billy cut it. Get out. Get out. Get out. He yelled in panic as he crawled back. In reflex, Kyle and I pulled Billy out of the cabin. Without any words, he slammed the cabin's door shut, and grabbed the hands of Kyle's and mine and dragged us out of there. You saw something? Kyle asked, with curiosity in his face. We looked back, and we saw the cabin still stood there. Well, it stood there, before eventually vanished right before our eyes. Run! Billy screamed. We ran out of the woods as fast as we could. As we got out, while we were still panting and trying to take a breath, Billy opened his bag, and pulled something out. It looked like a glass bottle, with a paper rolled up inside it. Billy put the paper out and opened it. It looked like a letter, and it was written in English. I haven't had a chance to fully read this, but I had a chance to read the name of a person who wrote it, right at the top of this letter, Billy explained as he pointed his finger at the top of the letter, where there were names written on it. Robbie Klein, Alexandra Dimes, Daniel Dixon, Morgan Lynx, Wait. Isn't that? I was consumed by horror as I noticed whose name was written there. They were names of Emma Dawn's friends. The very first group from our town that went missing in the woods 2 months ago. The letter explained what was happened to them. The letter appeared to be written using a natural element from trees as the ink. And it seemed like Robbie Klein decided to put the letter in the glass bottle they found, and keep it in the woods inside the cabin, with the hope that if the cabin's door opened again, the letter would find its way out. Or someone who accidentally got in the cabin, just like them, would find it. We gave the letter to the cops later on, which eventually made the cops contacted the federal to close the access to the woods, and cut off the information about the incident to spread further. But before we gave the letter to the police, we made a copy of the message in the letter. I warned you. Read this at your own risk. As I explained earlier, this might sound way too fantastic, insane and unbelievable, but we proved it ourselves. We were there. We saw the cabin ourselves. Here is what was written in the letter that Billy had accidentally found in the woods inside the cabin. This letter was written by Robbie Klein, representing myself, Alexandra Dimes, Daniel Dixon, and Morgan Lynx. Emma had gotten out of the cabin. She was saved. Unfortunately, the rest of us not. Please pray for us to be able to find the cabin's door again. However, just in case we would never have, we decided to let people know what happened to us, just so it wouldn't happen to anyone else. This is our last resort. We didn't expect this letter to successfully get out. We just wished that, somehow, it would. If Emma had successfully reached the town, she might already tell you what happened. As crazy as it might sound, it was true. On our walk around the woods to hunt for deer or rabbit, we stumbled upon a small cabin. The cabin looked more like an animal shelter than humans, but we, humans, could enter by crawling through the door. Inside the cabin, there were woods. No, seriously, there was a huge, tropical woods inside that small cabin. The cabin might be a 4-dimensional room, or the door might be a portal to another world. Either way, we were trapped here. We ran for our life when we spotted a creature that looked like a werewolf standing not far from us. After Emma had gotten out of the cabin's door and accidentally kicked the door close and made it vanish into thin air, we had no other options than to turn around and found a way to survive in the woods, while looking for a way out. The werewolf that we originally thought was hungry and was about to eat us alive, turned out to be just standing there, groaning like a beast. Somehow for every one of us, it sounded like it was trying to warn us out of something, but we didn't understand anything it said, so then, the werewolf turned around and ran to the woods, not to be seen again. We were walking through the tropical woods, surrounded by huge trees and fantastical flowers we have never seen before in our lives. Along the way, we passed by other creatures as strange as the werewolf we saw earlier. Strange enough for us, all of the creatures were all furry from head to toe, and they were all standing on 2 feet. Their faces looked so much like an animal. It looked like the creature was somehow made out of humans, which somehow was turned to be a furry 2-legged animal. And even if they saw us, none of them ran towards us, trying to eat us or kill us. They were just standing there, staring at us from afar. Morgan once told his opinion that he caught a glimpse of sadness in the creature's eyes while they were staring at us. We were walking through the woods, not knowing it had been for how long, or how far. The strangest moment of us being here, was when we spotted something that looked like a building. We immediately ran towards it. The building looked like it was made of concrete, with thick, bulletproof glasses on some parts of it. If there was a building, then it meant there was a civilization. If there was a civilization, then it meant there must be other human beings. In excitement, we were knocking on the wall and the windows, yelling for help. We were hoping anyone who lived in there would hear us. We followed the shape of the building, knocking every window that we saw. At one point, from the outside looking into one of the windows, we thought we saw something that looked like a human's silhouette. The window was dark, we couldn't see clearly of what was in there, and the glass was so thick, we weren't sure anyone on the inside would hear us. However, we were certain that there was someone in there, judging from the silhouette that we saw. And it was not just one or two. It was a group of people. Strangely, no matter what we did, either knocking or yelling, they were just stood there, watching. And then, at some point, the light on the inside of the building was brightened up. We started to be able to see clearly who was inside. We were sure it was a man. Some of them wore suits, some other wore lab coats. Due to the limitation of the light, we weren't able to see their faces. But then, slowly, it was getting clear. We were finally able to see their faces. As we saw the faces of the people who were staring at us from the inside, all of us were screaming as we jumped back in horror. There were many people there inside the building. And yes, they were wearing suits and lab coats. But they were not humans. They had heads of animals. Unlike the creatures we saw out here in the woods, the creatures we saw inside the building had the clear physical shape of animals' head, with the body of humans. There were elephants, lions, monkeys, birds, etc., and they were standing on 2 feet, wearing suits and lab coats. One of them, a humanoid lion wearing a suit, stepped ahead, and he did something that we assumed was pushing a button of a speaker, because then, it talked to us. "Hi there, humans," the humanoid lion said. "You haven't transformed yet, so I assumed you are new here. So, I'll just do the thing I always do every time there are new humans passing by this facility," the humanoid lion continued. "This place is a 4-dimensional animal shelter, located inside the cabin. I, along with other animals you saw here, happened to crawl through the cabin's door. And this place has different timescape than the outside world. What were 150 years here, only felt like a few minutes outside the cabin. Through that time, we have evolved from 4-legged animals, into 2-legged ones, with the intellects of human beings. Isn't that awesome?" he asked. "We enjoy living in this city of trees and flowers, so we are not planning to go out. We even plan to bring as many animals from the outside world to this sanctuary. We have the responsibility to save them too." The humanoid lion paused, then he continued, "From you, humans. You've been treating us like lab rats. Skinned us out for fashion. Hunting us down for fun. But here we are, in a sanctuary of animals and plants. So, you're planning to take revenge on us?" Daniel asked, stuttering. "Oh. No. We are not like you. And we promised ourselves that," the humanoid lion answered. "The thing is, even if we plan to bring other animals to this sanctuary, we have a hard time finding the door ourselves. It was opened and closed randomly at different coordinates each time, so that means, you guys will be stuck here for a while too. But if one day you managed to find the door, don't worry, we wouldn't hold you from getting out. I'm just here to inform you about the situation you are in right now. Oh, and the longer you stayed in the woods, the nectar spread by some flowers here, which you already breathed in since you entered the cabin, will slowly turn you into furry creatures. I believed you have already seen some of those creatures on your way here, the humanoid lion added. And one more thing. Don't expect us to let you inside the building. As I said, humans treated us so badly. We couldn't afford to trust any of you. So, while you're looking for the door to get you out, you'll be staying in the woods and learn to survive there. And while you are here, you will be the subject of our zoo. The humanoid lion continued its explanation. Which I hope you wouldn't mind, considering how you treated us in the zoo, after all. We are not hurting you though. We are just looking and observing. That's it, I guess. We hope the best for you. The humanoid lion closed his speech as he let go of the speaker button, and dimmed the light in the building, so we could no longer see them. After the meeting with the evolved humanoid animals, we had spent 3 days in the woods, trying to survive, before we decided to write the letter. By the time we wrote it, some of us already started to grow fur on our skins. Seemed like what the humanoid lion said was true. Here is why we wrote this letter, again. First thing first, is to avoid other people to be trapped in here again. Secondly, we were also thinking to remind us all about one thing. Wherever we are, whatever we do, please, we have to care about every living being surround us. Be it humans, animals, or plants. There will always a way for nature to take revenge on bad people. Hello, my friends. I want to tell the truth. In fact, I was going on a date, but on the way, I met a scary werewolf, and he told me to tell a story. My fiancée Alana and I have always been into the occult and paranormal. We're the kind of people who used to fantasize about getting to see a cryptid, or exploring a famous haunted location just for the thrill. I have to be careful about being around too much of the dark energy that some haunted locations have, though, since I'm an empath. For anyone not familiar with the term, an empath is defined as a person with the paranormal ability to apprehend the mental or emotional state of another individual. Since childhood, I've learned to manifest my ability, and by now I can absorb emotions from the physical and metaphysical realms. It's a blessing and a curse. Last Tuesday Alana and I were in the car on our way home from work when our favorite DJ came on the radio. Good evening. This is Mitchell McCarthy on WSK 99.4, and we have a treat for the first person who can call and name this song from the following snippet. This is your last chance to win one of our road trip revelry packages. After a brief pause, the music started playing, and we listened intently. I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and you, and I think to myself, what a wonderful. As it stopped, the radio host came back on. Now, let's see which lucky caller will win this road trip reward. Alana's mom is a huge fan of older music, so we already knew who it was and what the song was. My fiancée immediately dialed the number, not expecting to be the right caller, but she was. I grinned as she correctly blurted out the right answer, silently high-fiving her. Louis Armstrong, what a wonderful world. The radio host paused dramatically, then he made a drum roll sound with his hands. Ladies and gents, we have a winner. You know what that means, miss. You and 2 friends have won an all-inclusive road trip to wonderful New Orleans, and you guys will be getting to Louisiana just in time to get some badass. My fiancé got off the phone, grinning from ear to ear. Let's go pick up the tickets, though I know neither one of us is really interested in Mardi Gras. I nodded, thinking about who else we should have tagged along with us. Oh, we should bring Go. He's right along the way, and who said we have to go to Mardi Gras? I'd rather go to the Manchac Swamp, the home of the Rugar. I think the locals call it the Cajun Werewolf. After getting the hotel tickets and the food and gas vouchers, we packed our bags. I made sure to bring a bunch of extra socks, since I've always hated having wet socks on, and then we called up the office and put in our time off. 2 weeks later we set off on a road trip from northeast Pennsylvania to the Bayou country of Louisiana, and I couldn't remember being more excited for a vacation. The whole ride south, Alana and I discussed our plans for the trip. Neither of us had ever been to Louisiana or thought we ever would, so we had never looked up what things were in the area to do. Upon searching Google rigorously, we finally made a plan for our week in Louisiana, and it couldn't have been more perfect unless we went in October rather than July. Monday we would just relax in the hotel, but we weren't staying in just any hotel. The one the radio prize included was a stay at the Dauphine Orleans Hotel, which was located in the French Quarter. This hotel is rumored to be one of the most haunted hotels in Louisiana, and it complemented the theme of our trip perfectly. Tuesday we would explore the French Quarter and see if we could spot the infamous vampire twins of Louisiana. On Wednesday we would explore the outskirts of the city and try to find old houses that had been abandoned, as well as visiting some of the famous voodoo shops. Thursday we would explore the supposedly haunted St. Vincent's Asylum, which was also located in the French Quarter, and then for the weekend, we would go to the Manchac Swamp and camp. We would search for the Rugar, and for the voodoo princess Julie White's cabin that was said to be hidden deep in the Manchac Swamp. As the hours passed, Alana and I would switch off driving through each state, stopping for leg breaks. Finally, 14 hours into the trip, we reached our pit stop for the night. We parked in my best friend Kindera, who we call Co's, driveway in Birmingham, Alabama, and it felt great to be out of the car. It was actually our first time meeting him in person, so it was an emotional moment for all of us. He was overjoyed to see his big bro and big sis, and since he was a fairly large man, he squeezed us into his pillow-like frame with gusto. After telling him about our plan for the week, he was eager to pack some camping gear and to read up about local lore. His tone was zealous, and he quickly gathered what he needed. I want to see the giant wolf man of Manchac Swamp. That was the last thing he said before we all went to sleep, and after 14 hours of straight driving, my fiancé and I were so exhausted that even the hardwood floor of Co's bedroom felt like a memory foam mattress. The next morning we got up around 8:30 and set off on the last 4 hours of the drive. We were so excited to finally be in the voodoo capital of the US, and right around mid-afternoon, we reached New Orleans. The minute I stepped into the hotel, the energy hit me like a freight train. It made me physically sick for about an hour, and after checking into room number 113 we decided to relax and take a nap. We wanted to spend the night with our EVP and heat cameras, trying to find any spirits that were here and to see if they were as bad as they seemed. None of us could sleep well though. I'm not sure if it was because of our excitement, or if something more paranormal was keeping us awake. We ate dinner out and checked out some local attractions, and when the clock hit midnight and we got our equipment unpacked, the EVP meter immediately started going off, worse than at any other place I had been to. Alana and Co nearly shit their pants at the sight of how much energy was in our room, and it definitely explained the feeling I had when I first walked into the building. After 20 minutes of setting up cameras and unpacking equipment, we were ready to explore. As we walked through the empty halls of the hotel, we whispered about how odd it was that such a packed hotel would be so silent in the dead of night. Nearly 45 minutes had passed and nothing was caught on our heat camera. And the EVP device wasn't going off as much as it was initially, so we decided to call it a night since we would have more time to explore in the upcoming days. The next few days passed, and we were all growing restless over the fact that we hadn't seen anything even remotely paranormal yet. The places we picked should have had at least some kind of interesting vibes, but there wasn't anything. Over dinner, on Wednesday night, Alana made a proposal that Go and I readily agreed to. "Babe, can we just cancel the St. Vincent's tour and go to the swamp tomorrow? It seems like all of the drunk, living parties scared anything paranormal off." After she was done talking, I nodded enthusiastically, and Go breathed a sigh of relief. Thank God someone else had the same thought. We set off back to the hotel to check out and gather our stuff. After about an hour of packing, we fit everything back into our car, heading straight to a trailhead near the swamp. Based off all of the legends, this was the part of the swamp that we would be most likely to see the Ruger in or find the alleged still standing witch's cabin. Since I was the only one who was an avid hunter, I was the only one with a gun, and I made sure to pack my .45 caliber pistol with 2 full clips of ammo in case of an emergency. It's common knowledge that large snakes and alligators live in the swamps in Louisiana, so we had figured that we would rather have some means of defense than nothing. After walking for what seemed like hours, we finally decided to take a rest. We had just trekked through one of the roughest parts of the swamp trail, so I immediately changed my socks. I figured that we could use the grime-covered ones as fire fuel later in the night if we couldn't find tinder, and I had plenty with me, so I wasn't worried. Thankfully it was a warm night in the swamp though, so we didn't need to start a fire at all. The fireflies surrounded us that night, and it was as if there were a million stars. It was literally the most beautiful thing any of us had ever seen, and it was so relaxing that we all were dozing off in our camping chairs. That is until we heard an eardrum-bursting howl that sounded like it was right behind us. I took out my pistol and fired a warning shot, and a moment later the grass behind us parted to reveal a scraggly-looking man with long, dark hair. "Please, don't shoot me. I wandered into here on accident, and I don't even know where here is. I heard you guys talking and thought you might know the way out." My fiancée, being the caring person she is, paid no mind to the fact that his clothing was torn up and he looked a little unhinged. She invited him to sit with us and even got him a granola bar. After about 10 uncomfortable minutes, I finally spoke up. "So, why are your clothes torn up?" He gave a vague response about how the swampy can beat you up, but he didn't go into detail. I once again tried to get some information out of our strange visitor, though his heavy Cajun accent was a little hard to understand. "Did you see the thing that made that horrendous howl?" He shifted a little, and I could tell he wasn't feeling very comfortable with my questions. He finally replied, after thinking about his response carefully. "Boy, you can call me Jack. Now that we are all friends here, there is no need to worry. I can assure you I'm not one of those beasts. In fact, that howl is what scared me into coming here. I don't know how I got here, though I'm assuming I was drunk after the last week of Mardi Gras." I looked at Ko as if to give him an "I don't trust him" completely look. Ko immediately returned the look, but we continued to chat amicably. We gave Jack an extra sleeping bag and told him that he was welcome to sleep in one of the chairs. We said we would show him the way out in the morning since it was too dangerous to travel in the swamp at night, which he readily agreed to. The next morning we all arose to find Jack was missing. I looked at Alana and shook my head. "Still trust him? You and I both know he had very odd energy." She sighed and just looked down, knowing I was right. We packed our gear up, hiking further into the swamp. The next few hours went fast, and the heat was blistering. We all just wanted to relax in the water, but even we knew it wasn't wise to swim in bayou water. A few hours later we finally saw a broken down shack in the middle of the swamp, and we got excited. What if this was the cabin of the voodoo princess? The shack had been left untouched for a long time since there was moss growing on everything. We made our way inside the building and were immediately weirded out. Laying in the floor was a little hand-sewn doll, and it looked exactly like Jack. We decided to set up camp for the night but made sure we got well away from the shack. That night was a bit chillier, so we made a fire. We were telling scary stories around it when we again heard a loud howl. No sooner had I put my gun in my hands when Jack came walking out of the swamp. Friends, we meet again. I'm sorry I left so unexpectedly this morning. A big snake chased me off, and then I got lost until I saw the fire. Mind if I stay with you again tonight? We hesitated, but we didn't want him to get hurt out there, so we agreed. He smiled and thanked us again, and the hours passed quickly as we ate and chatted until we got sleepy. The next morning the same thing happened. Jack had vanished again, leaving us all extremely concerned. I had decided that if we saw him again tonight I would stay awake until morning to see where he kept going. We hiked back out of the swamp, double timing it to cover more ground than our previous, unhurried pace. We had not seen anything out of the normal, other than that doll and Jack, but we had still had fun. We got back to the first campsite relatively fast, though we were all exhausted by then. After setting up camp I told Ko and Alana my plan for the night in case Jack came back, and Ko decided he would be staying up with me because he didn't want to risk me getting harmed. Once again we heard the howl after sunset, and as expected Jack came walking out of the swamp behind us right after. We all exchanged a look and welcomed him back as though nothing had happened. A few hours later Alana fell asleep, and so did Ko despite him saying he would stay up. He finally passed out, and I pretended to while still keeping an eye on Jack. I must have dozed off at some point because when I opened my eyes the fire was out and Jack was heading into a nearby clump of bushes. I got up and followed him, trying to see where he went in the dim moonlight. "Jack, where are you going?" His response was not what I expected. Instead of hearing him shout back I heard the howl again, but this time it was behind me. As I turned around slowly I saw it, the Rugar. It was a large, almost humanoid white wolf with the most blood-red eyes I had ever seen. I'm ashamed to admit it, but I was terrified and I blacked out. Upon waking I jumped up and looked around, terrified because I was still somewhere in the swamp with that thing. Dawn was just showing, and I stumbled back to camp. I could hear Alana and Ko shouting to me from the distance, and I hurried back to them. They looked worried sick, and we were relieved to be back together. We figured I must have had a night terror, which I was known for, and I must have sleepwalked out of camp. We made our way out of the swamp and back to our car, and after packing up quickly we headed out of Louisiana and back towards Ko's house. On our way home, however, I felt different. I was more hungry than normal, and as I looked into the mirror my normally hazel eyes did something I had never seen before. They flashed blood red, just like that monster I had seen last night. Hello, friends. I love cold cola. Oh, no, it hurts. Be sure to subscribe to my channel. Connor Kane was evil incarnate. Nobody had known this about him, however, as Connor successfully led a double life. He was your average policeman during the night, but at night he was a person's worst nightmare. He killed 13 people and raped over 50 in a decade and was never caught or even suspected once. Connor Kane did what he did because he had urges to exert control over and to hurt others, urges he had had since his childhood. He controlled these urges for nearly 2 decades until he had to use force to detain an armed robber. That's when he realized just how good it felt to instill fear into the hearts of men. They've called him the Golden State Demon once he gained notoriety. His apparent ability to terrorize the residents of California with near supernatural powers earned him that nickname. Connor knew not to stay for too long in a single location, thus frequently asked to be transferred around the counties of the state. He also knew to avoid being predictable and thus chose various weapons and picked his victims randomly. He would stalk a person or a couple for weeks on end, gathering as much information on them to make his assault as seamless as possible. He'd frequently use what he had learned to leave misleading clues behind. He would usually break in quietly into one's storehouses in the dead of night, followed by him searching for any personal documentation of his victims, so he could pretend to be someone they knew from their private life. He assaulted most of his rape victims in the presence of a spouse or a partner, sometimes even in the presence of their children. Connor would tie his victims and their partners with shoelaces and force them to lie on their stomachs. Then he'd place any available ceramic objects on the partner's back before threatening he'd kill one of them if he heard the ceramics rattle. He forced the complete majority to watch their beloved getting raped, unable to do anything about it. They would lie there, frozen in fear, begging internally for the nightmare to come to an end. It wouldn't end there. Sometimes he'd kill the people he'd been terrorizing, other times, he'd just stand there, in the dark corner of their room for hours before leaving, making sure they knew the demon was still haunting them. Connor Kane's evil knew no boundaries, as once he raided the house of a married couple at a night during which their young daughter was sleeping with them. The demon tied up the little girl's parents before pulling out a handgun and instructing the girl to lay face down in between them and stare at the wall. He then told her with a menacing whisper, "If you move as much as a finger, Daddy dies." After that, he violated her mother in front of her and her father. The little girl held down tears and tried with all of her might not move. She did not want to anger the man who held a gun to her father's head. The father kept whispering under his breath for his daughter to stay strong and not move. She held out for a while, but then an itch crawled up her leg. The little girl tried to ignore it as hard as she could, but it only grew worse, making its way up her thigh, growing into an almost painful sensation. It was driving her insane, but she knew she couldn't move. She knew if she moved as much as a fiber of her body, the bad man would notice and then kill her father. Seconds became minutes, and the sensation was unbearable. The girl broke, she twitched her little leg, barely an inch. The demon noticed. A muffled shot rang through the room. Blood and brain matter caked the girl and her mother. These were things of the past for Connor, however, as with the birth of his 4th child, he had decided to keep that part of his life behind him. Sure, he was never the perfect father or husband, but he had never raised his arms against his family. Sure, he was an ill-tempered and violent man, but in his civil life, he would usually reserve his violence on the verbal side of things. Sure, his neighbors avoided him out of fear, but mostly, he did not seem exactly murderous to those around him. Just a little violent. If only they knew. If only they knew just how much he enjoys their fear, just like an actual demon. All of that changed during a town hall meeting that included a few policemen, including Connor and a transfer officer named Jeffrey Bishop. Before the beginning of the meeting, Connor read up on the news about a new serial killer on the state's west coast, one that left his victims in shreds. They've named this savage the West Coast Werewolf because of his brutal way of dismembering his victims. It seemed as if an animal had torn out chunks of flesh out of their bodies, leaving behind barely recognizable pulps of bile and gore. Connor attended the meeting mostly, so he could know if there were any leads on him. As he expected, there were none. He made sure he wouldn't leave any clues leading back to himself. Something caught his attention amidst the conversation about his alter ego. It was Officer Bishop who had proposed that the fabled Golden State Demon was not a single man but rather a group of connected individuals or copycat criminals, since in his mind there was no way a man could commit so many atrocities without being caught or compromised by one of his victims. It seemed absurd to an outsider, because it made so little sense to him. That's what set the gears in Connor's head off again. The urges came back upon hearing the words of his newest colleague. He felt disrespected and needed to prove to the newcomer who's in charge. Connor was nearing his 40th year and had 4 kids and a wife at home. He knew he couldn't keep up his double life for a long time. Thus, he decided that Bishop would be his final victim, a last horror for the beast before he could bury it in the depths of his mind for good. And so, he set out to strike out a friendship with Jeffrey Bishop, one so tight he could know just about anything one would need to know to slip past the man's defenses, and into his bedroom at the middle of the night. For months Connor made his way up to Jeffrey's heart, and eventually they became best friends, at least from Jeffrey's point of view. Connor, he considered no one to be his friend. Luckily enough for him, no one seemed to notice his change of heart when it came to his new and only friend. He spent most of his time hanging out with his new pal, which prevented him from being verbally abusive towards others. A win-win situation for everyone, or so it seemed. After months of preparation, Connor Kane was ready to strike down his final victim. He decided to victimize Bishop himself while forcing his wife to watch. By this point, he had known the layout of the Bishop family's home by heart. He knew their kid, Michael, had a soundproof room. Connor knew all of Jeffrey's secrets. He knew where the safe was, and he was sure he had known the code to it. Their dog loved him. However, he knew the Bishops had a spare key under their doormat. Jeffrey had shown it to him some time ago when he got locked outside once. With his plan set, Connor opted to make his move on the night of Valentine's Day. He found the notion romantic to a point it made him laugh. The days passed and Valentine's Day finally arrived. Connor, trying to be the best husband he can for a change, took his wife out on a celebratory date. She enjoyed it. They had a good time together, something they hadn't had in a while. The hours flew by them, and at nightfall, once his wife was sound asleep, along with the kids, Connor got out of his bed, readied himself and left for the Bishop's house. Stealing a bicycle from someone's yard, he made his way through the streets under the covers of darkness. His mind was blank, focused on one thing: taking over the Bishop's lives and making them his bitches. A stark contrast to the loving husband and father he had been just hours before. The Golden State Demon may have started out as a common killer, but in his years of experience, he had become the perfect murder machine. Connor could not wait to get his hands on Jeffrey and Brenda Bishop. He could feel himself salivating at the prospect of what he had in store for them. He made it to the street on which the Bishops lived, but then discarded the bicycle and made his way to their home on foot. Soon enough he reached the house and found the family German Shepherd, Deacon, in a terrified state. Connor did not understand what could scare the dog, but he paid no mind to it. After all, he was the boogeyman in the eyes of many. He was the thing in the dark. He was the thing everyone told their children about to make sure they behaved. He was, in his own mind, a god. Connor made his way to the front door, took the key from underneath the doormat and slowly unlocked the door. He then patiently made his way to the bedroom in which he knew the bishops had been sleeping. Slowly, painfully slowly, he opened the door to their bedroom as to not wake them up prematurely. Once the door was ajar just enough for him to slip through, he slid his frame through the opening and quietly paced towards the bed in the room's center. Once close enough to the bed, he poked at Jeffrey Bishop's arm. "Jeff, wake up," he whispered as he pulled out his gun. But no response came. He called out the man's name again. Still not a sound. Fury coursed through his veins as Connor kicked the side of the bishop's bed screaming, "Wake the fuck up!" Still, no sound came, nor a movement. The bishops didn't budge at all. It was like they didn't feel Connor's kick. Connor grabbed Jeffrey's body by the neck and yanked him off the bed onto the floor with tremendous force. That's when he felt it. A warm liquid made its way through his gloves, and he let go of Jeffrey's body, cursing under his breath. "No, no, what there?" he cursed as he pulled out his flashlight and shone it around the room. The sight that was unraveled before him sent shockwaves of adrenaline across his body. The bodies of Jeffrey and Brenda Bishop were mangled and torn apart. Brenda's torso was torn wide open with her ribs torn outwards and her guts spilled all over the bed below her. Her neck was torn up as well. Jeffrey's body was in no better shape. His neck was torn apart, and the chest cavity was collapsed inwards, with the heart and one lung missing from the grotesque, unnatural cavity. Connor felt fear, for the first time in years. He hadn't felt that since the night when he saw his father beat his own brother to death with his own bare hands. The sight of his bloodied uncle tied up to a chair, as his drunken father beats on him with his fists and legs, flooded Connor's psyche, making him grasp at his head as he stumbled away from the crimson-colored bed. That night was when Connor realized that the feeling of power over others is the best feeling in the world. His father only beat his uncle to death only because that was his uncle's death wish upon discovery of his alcoholism leading to the development of a terminal illness, but by the time he found that out, Connor Kane was far too gone. Connor never seemed to grasp that this violent act of mercy tormented that his father. His father, he shot himself before Connor's eyes when he was just 12. The fates had destined to become what he had turned out to be, a monster who cannot handle being out of absolute control. "I hate you. I fucking hate you. I hate you. I fucking hate you, you fucking coward," Connor yelled out into the air as he waved his gun around. Despite the emotional turmoil he was experiencing, the man knew he was dealing with the West Coast werewolf. He had seen the photos of the crime scenes left by that animal. The bishops' bodies looked the same as all the others. Connor snapped. He tore off his ski mask and screamed at the top of his lungs, "Police! Show yourself!" as he marched around the house with his gun aimed forward. He knew if the werewolf was still in the house, he'd have to apprehend or kill him. There was no other way around it. But after long moments of frantic searching, Connor couldn't find anything. He had one last room to check, Michael's. "You're fucking dead," Connor spat as he made his way towards the child's room. He pressed one of his hands on the handle and carefully pushed it down. The door creaked slightly as he pushed it open. Connor then made his way quietly into the room, and it was dark. Almost unnaturally dark. Connor with his eyes around the room, but he could find nothing but a peacefully sleeping child inside. "Fuck," he whispered as quietly as he could before lowering his gun and making his way out of the room. The werewolf, he was gone. That's what Connor thought when the door behind him creaked, and he froze. Turning his head back slowly, he saw something dark crawl out of the room. It crawled on all fours in movements that mesmerized the diabolical policeman. He carelessly opened fire on the ever-approaching creature. Every single bullet hit, creating new cavities in the beast's body. It wouldn't stop moving towards Connor, not even with an array of new cavities in its body. The commotion woke Michael up, and upon seeing the child, the policeman yelled at him to get back to his room. Before the kid could even register his words, the beast lunged itself at Connor, slamming hard into the ground. The boy screamed at the top of his lungs. The beast, unrelenting, grabbed at Connor's body before throwing it over its own head with inhuman strength. Connor crushed hard on the floor next to a panicking child. The landing caused him to spit blood. As he began getting back up to his feet, he came to notice the large humanoid creature looming over him with various wounds still closing themselves up. "So, you're a real werewolf or something, eh?" Connor blurted out as he spat on the floor, looking around for his gun, which had been knocked away from him. "Not quite the werewolf," the thing retorted in a deep, clear voice. Connor then tried to punch the creature, but it caught his arm, crushing it with its grip. The agonizing pain forced the policeman to wail out. The beast then punched Connor so hard in the chest that a loud cracking noise filled the hallway. Connor lost his breath and coughed up more blood as he flew back to the floor. Rolling around in pain, his eyes met Michael's mortified stare. "Run, kid," he murmured out before trying to force himself up back to his feet. His whole body exploding with pain and his head clouded from a clear lack of oxygen. Michael just stood there, frozen. He wouldn't move. He couldn't. Connor staggered back to his feet and tried to shove the child back into his room, but the beast caught his arms from behind and pulled them backward, causing the man to drop to his knees as he cries in pain. The beast proceeded to place its foot onto Connor's back, yanking slightly at the arms. The man begged for mercy, but the beast wouldn't relent, and with a mighty crack, the arms were torn off and thrown to the floor. Connor sank to the floor as two streams of lightning bolts made up of pain struck him at his sides. Connor was slipping into unconsciousness as the beast grabbed him by the back of his neck and bit his head off before throwing it aside. The demon of the Golden State was dead. It was a rather painless one. He felt nothing anymore the moment 2 rows of jagged teeth sunk into his neck. After discarding Connor's head aside, the beast stared at Michael and smiled, a wide bloody toothy grin, and Michael, well, he smiled back as he stared around wide-eyed at the carnage that covered the entire hall. "Good job, kiddo," the beast told the child. "Thanks. I still can't believe Uncle Connor was the mean man," the child answered. The blood-covered monstrosity made his way towards the child and picked him up on its hands, saying, "Well, sometimes the people you think you know the best are the ones you should be wary of. I'm so tired of pretending to be scared of you, Mr. Upper. I wanna go back to sleep," the boy called out weakly, clutching at the monster's frame. "Off to bed with you, then," the monster called as it carried the child back to his room. "Thanks for saving Mommy and Daddy, Mr. Upper. You're the best," the boy said between tired yawns. "Don't mention it." The words came out slurred because of an excessive build-up of saliva. Soon enough, the ungodly shrieks of a child being torn into chunks of blood and pulp in his own bedroom awoke the whole neighborhood. Hello, friends. I found this magic box in the forest. I use my magic stone to open the box. Wow, the box is protected by very strong magic. I'm not fat. Not even a little. Actually, I am pretty underweight for my height, which is a constant battle with my primary physician who worries about eating disorders, despite the fact that I most certainly do not have one. No, not fat. But there is a word for what I am. They call it skinny fat. Okay, so what's skinny fat? Well, it's when someone is skinny like me and doesn't gain weight no matter how terribly they eat, but in return, they are wildly unhealthy because they eat so poorly. That's where I was sitting at the beginning of the year. I'm not stupid, I know that my lifestyles and habits are unhealthy. I don't exercise. I eat like shit. And, in turn, I'm always sick. I'm always having stomach problems and feeling faint and dizzy. Physically, my life is kind of a nightmare, and I have no one to blame but myself. So, this year, like many other people, I decided things would be different. I was going to get healthy, god damn it. I was going to work out. I was going to eat right. And hopefully, I'd see an improvement in my health. So, I did what any other poor sucker does when their life is a mess that they have no idea how to fix it. I made it my New Year's resolution. I was in luck because a new gym had just opened up in my neighborhood and they were giving out discounted memberships for the first 100 or so members. Of course, I signed up immediately. This is perfect, I said to myself. If I'm spending money on a gym membership, it means that I'll definitely go. As if that's ever worked for anyone. I went to their website to sign up, and as I was perusing their options, I saw something interesting. Personal trainers. You know, I'd never given much thought to a personal trainer before. I just assumed I wouldn't need one. It's not like I was going to be training for the Olympics or anything. I didn't need to get super buff. I just wanted to feel better. But it was an ad for their trainers that caught my eye. Did it read, "Not sure where to start? Get tips and tools for beginners from our specially trained personal trainers." Well, that definitely applied to me. Now that I was thinking about it, I really didn't know where to start. What was I going to be doing, anyway? Cardio? Weightlifting? I didn't know how much I should be doing or how fast or anything like that. As for healthy eating, I had no idea how I was going to tackle that colossal problem. Hey, maybe a trainer could help. And the best part was that the gym website guaranteed the first month would be free. Well, in that case, there's nothing to lose, I thought as I signed myself up for a trainer named George. I wasn't really sure what I was getting myself into when I walked into the gym on January 1st. To be honest, I was already feeling kind of defeated. After all, most people never keep their New Year's resolutions. Actually, I myself rarely keep them. Wasn't this all just an exercise in futility? Maybe I should just go home and give up before I embarrassed myself. But no, I decided I was going to try. At least for this first day. I had to. First, I had to sign in at the front desk. The receptionist was a woman who was skinny like I was but had some definite musculature, and she looked. Wow, she looked so happy. And my heart ached because I wanted to be like that. First time in a gym? She asked as she was rummaging through her drawer looking for a card for me. Yeah, I admitted, feeling a little foolish. Don't worry, she beamed at me, handing me my gym membership card. I used to be just like you, actually. But then I started working out with this gym company and, believe me, everything got so much better for me. You're working with a trainer, right? Which one? Someone named George. Oh, I worked with George. You're in for a real treat. He's amazing and he won't let you quit. She smiled even wider, if that were possible, and waved me on through the doors. That made me feel a lot better and I walked into the gym with a little more confidence, feeling as though, yes, I could actually do this. That feeling flew out the window when I saw George. The man was huge, I mean, really fucking huge. His muscles bulged out like balloons, but they looked about as hard as steel. He was bald and had hard eyes, despite their light blue color. Overall, he looked incredibly severe and intimidating. I was fairly certain that he could crush me with just 2 of his fingers. Great, I thought to myself in misery. He's gonna take one look at me and laugh at how pathetic I am. Instead, he smiled at me, and it transformed him from a murderous-looking muscle monster to a friendly, almost sweet hulk of a man. You must be Monica. He beamed at me. I've been waiting for you. You seem pretty nervous, first time, right? Here, let me walk you through what we'll be doing together. And he did. We spent an hour together just going through a game plan to get me started towards my goal. By the time that hour was up, we'd become friends. At least, I felt like we had. He was easygoing and fun to talk to. We joked together. Best of all, he didn't make me feel like a failure for my state of total physical disrepair. It happens, he shrugged when I mentioned how ashamed I was. Physical fitness doesn't come as easy to some as it does to others. That's why there are people like me. To help people like you out. He winked at me and I laughed. Here's the plan we came up with, as he described it to me. Basically, you need to focus on your weight and your heart health, he said. So we're going to start on cardio with a touch of weightlifting to get you some muscle mass. In order for this to work, however, you need to start paying attention to what you're eating. He must have seen my face when he said that because he laughed and was quick to reassure me. It's not that bad. Your problem is you start out with goals that you can't possibly reach. Let's face it, you're not going to switch over to an all-vegetarian, super healthy diet overnight. Let's take it one step at a time. For now, I want you to cut out the soda and fast food. In addition, I want you to drink this. He handed me a bottle and I read the label. Weight On, the one-stop weight gain formula. A Solomon Company product. I recognized Solomon. It was the name of the gym. You guys have your own protein shakes? Actually, we have a variety of formulas to suit a variety of needs, he explained. This one has a high caloric content that should help you gain a little weight. We have other products for people who are overweight or are managing medical problems like diabetes. They're very important to our programs. I promise you, if you drink this twice a day, you'll start seeing results and it'll be worth it. Give it a week and you'll be very, very pleased. Alright. How much will it cost? I asked. Because let's face it, I wasn't made of money, and this sounded a hell of a lot like a scam to take more money. Absolutely free, comes with the trainer program, he answered. Well, that settled it. The rest of that day's session was spent with George introducing me to all the equipment and facilities in the gym. When the session came to an end, he handed me a box of the formula, 14 bottles, enough to last me a week. I promised him I'd give it a try and come in every day at 3 to start working out. I left feeling lighter than I had in weeks, and as I walked out, The woman at the desk smiled at me and said, "Gee, you look as though you're walking on the moon." I grinned. Maybe I am. I was wary about the formulas at first. It seemed almost like cheating, you know? Or like a scam. I know that results only come from hard work, so anything that makes it easier is wrong, somehow. But I promised I'd try it, so I did. I drank my first shake that day. I was ready to hold my nose and down it at once, struggling to keep it down, because I know how those things usually taste. Hint, like sweaty ass. It was delicious. It was chocolate, my favorite, and it kind of tasted like an ice cream shake. I drank it all in one go. I noticed a change immediately. Suddenly, I was ravenously hungry. After my stop at the gym, I had bought a bunch of health foods, fruits, vegetables, the whole 9 yards. I sat down and ate almost everything I'd bought that day. It was like I couldn't get enough. I was hungrier than I'd ever been in my life. I was almost worried that I would get sick from the eating. My stomach has always been sensitive, but I didn't. In fact, my stomach felt better than it had in years. In my whole life, actually. I was thrilled. By the time I went in to work out the next day, I was already looking better. My skin wasn't so deathly pale and my hair wasn't shedding as much as it usually does. I didn't feel faint or queasy. I felt great. And George noticed. "See, what did I tell you?" he said. "Those shakes are like miracles. They give your body what they've been missing." That day, the 2nd of January, was my first real day of working out. Before the shakes, I'd been dreading it, but seeing how great I felt, I couldn't wait to get started. It definitely wasn't easy, but it wasn't nearly as bad as I thought it would be. I usually don't feel anything from exercise other than pain and exhaustion, but this time it was exhilarating. I found it extremely rewarding to push myself to see how far I could go, my endorphins climbing higher and higher as George cheered me on. I was able to run for a full half hour when I'd only been able to do about 15 minutes in the past. I did squats and cleans, and worked for a good half hour with the dumbbells. The more I worked, the stronger I felt. I loved it. The working out went great over the rest of the week. I was feeling healthier, I was eating healthier, I was gaining muscle mass and I was no longer underweight. I was improving so quickly it made my head spin. I was overjoyed. It was the other stuff that wasn't so good. It started with dreams. They weren't that bad, I guess, just strange. In them, I was a warrior. I was strong and tall and powerful. It was the power that was so intoxicating, at least as the beginning of the dreams. But then, I'd start to feel as though I was losing control. My muscles would grow and grow and grow until they were too big. Eventually, they would burst and I would explode in a hailstorm of viscera. If it were just the dreams, it wouldn't have bothered me so much. But it didn't stop there. The next thing I noticed had to do with my fingernails. They grew. I mean, okay, fingernails are supposed to do that. But they aren't supposed to grow so fast. I'd clip them in the morning, and by that afternoon I'd have a full inch extending beyond the flesh of my fingers. My hair followed suit. It went from my shoulders to the middle of my back in one afternoon. Weird. But I wasn't ready to admit that something was wrong. My life was better than it had ever been, oddities or not. I was beginning to rethink my convictions by the time the 7th of January, the end of the first week, rolled around. Everything was growing. My teeth were the most troublesome. I couldn't even shut my mouth all the way because they were so long and pointy. I was starting to feel like a vampire or werewolf or something. My eyelashes had grown out and I actually had to trim them. Weird, I know. My fingers and toes were growing longer. I was sure that I was taller. Muscle mass wasn't the only thing I was gaining from these formulas. I decided to ask George on that day's session. I got to the gym early, hoping that he'd have a little time to talk before we started our session. They must not have been expecting me because no one was at the front desk to check my gym membership. With a shrug, I signed my name on the sign-in sheet and headed for the girls' locker room. No one was around at all. Maybe they weren't even open yet. But everything was unlocked. Well, whatever, it didn't really bother me. Until that is, I saw the hole in the floor. I got closer and realized that there was a door in the floor, with a ladder leading down underneath the locker rooms. I tried to shrug it off, thinking that it probably just led to some electrical shit. But this weird feeling was nagging at me. It nagged and nagged and nagged until it got the better of me and I decided to check it out. I set my bag on the floor next to the door and climbed down the ladder, relishing how easy it was for me since I'd been working out. I almost forgot the whole reason I was going down until I reached the floor. This next part is going to be hard. Hard for me to write and hard for you to understand. But, please try. I need someone to understand for me, because, fuck, I can't do it. I was standing at the end of a long tunnel. A tunnel lined with cages. They were heavy-duty cages, too, with huge padlocks and steel. The things inside them. I think, at one point, they were human. Actually, I'm certain of it. But they couldn't be said to resemble humans anymore, at least not as we know them. I'll start with the first one. The first I saw was to my right. Judging by the amount of hair, I'd say it had once been a girl, but who knows? Now, she was. Skin. It looked as though her skin had just grown. And grown and grown. It was piled on the floor now, a massive pile of at least 10 feet across and 6 feet high. And from the inside, I heard a low groaning, as though someone was being crushed under the weight. I looked to my left. This one had definitely been a man at one point. He was stretched out, his neck and limbs and torso too long to function. The worst was his head, however. It, too, had been stretched, so that his eyes swam around in sockets that were now too wide, and his jaw hung open, dislocated from the elongation of his skull. After those two, the creatures became a blur. I ran down the tunnel, my eyes scanning all the horrors underneath that gym. Some had huge internal organs that had burst through the torso and were no longer so internal. Some had giant eyes pooling out of their head, twitching on the ground, staring up at me. Some were still alive. Most were already dead. I was probably only down there for 2 minutes, but that was enough. I scrambled out the tunnel and ran out of the gym, grabbing my bag on the way out so they wouldn't know that I'd been there. I got into my car and sped home, without so much as a thought as to what I was supposed to do. Later, I thought about going back and trying to save them, but looking at them had already told me the truth. They were beyond saving. I half expected the gym to have disappeared by the next day, as though it had all been a bad dream or something. But it's still there. The website is still up and George has been calling me, asking where I am. I never answer my phone anymore. Another week's worth of formula arrived at my doorstep yesterday. I drained them all down the sink and threw them away. I was almost disappointed, but thinking back to those things down in that tunnel. Well, I'd rather work out the old-fashioned way than end up like them. Getting rid of them wasn't easy, But I consoled myself by deciding that they almost certainly weren't FDA approved. I've been waiting for someone to come after me. I thought I'd gotten out of there without anyone seeing me, only to remember once I got home that I'd signed in. They knew I'd been there. They probably knew what I'd seen. I'm still too afraid to leave my room. So, anyway. If you want the Reader's Digest version, I missed going to the gym these last few days and have broken my resolution. I would like to point out that it's not entirely my fault. So, does anyone know a good gym that won't try to kill me? Hello, friends. From this side, the kettle will boil much faster. Be sure to subscribe to my channel. The bangs. All of them? Their sounds. They awoke me. I bolted right up in my bed. Looking around, I found nothing out of the ordinary. My room was perfectly normal, all my things exactly where I had left them. The half-empty glass of water, still half-empty, the comic book I was reading still unfinished. But those sounds, I had heard enough of them to know what they were. Gunshots. I had a cousin that worked for the law. Forehead James had fired enough for me to recognize them at the drop of a hat. He was called that because he had a huge scar across his forehead which he had received in a supposed act of heroism. I stepped off my bed, still dazed and in confusion as to what was going on. We had recently moved to the suburbs of a small town, so there's always a risk of bandits raiding our neighborhood. I made my way downstairs, worried about Mom and Dad. The stairs creaked and groaned as if they were in pain as I made my way down. What I saw shocked me. Everything was in disarray. The furniture all was torn up and dishes all broken. I know I'm a heavy sleeper, but good heavens, this was just ridiculous. The wooden floor was lined with a river of blood leading outside. The nauseating smell of gunpowder filled my lungs as I tried to make sense of what was happening. Mom and Dad weren't in their room. I put on my jacket and as I made my way out I noticed something very bizarre. Tufts of grey fur all over the porch. I leaned in to examine it. They were covered in blood and some of them were parallel to the trail of blood leading away. I started to follow it. The more I looked around, the more events started to elude me. Everyone's front doors were wide ajar and it seemed similar scuffles had taken place all over the town. The fur and the occasional spots of blood were everywhere. If I were to describe to you what the situation reminded me of, let me ask you a question. Have you ever been to a festival or a carnival after it had ended? The town reeked of that similar feeling. As if a massive event had just transpired and I was only an observer of its aftermath. The thought of how I could have mindlessly slept through the entire thing bugged me incessantly. Still oblivious, I noticed something on the ground a few feet ahead of me. It was very tiny. I approached the object as it glistened under the moonlit night, which is why it caught my eye in the first place. I learned to pick it up and immediately dropped it. It was extremely hot to the touch and had burned my fingers somewhat. Some sort of shining piece of metal. It seemed as if it had broken off of something. As I was about to inspect it closely, I heard a blood-curdling howl. It sends a wave of shivers down my spine. I had never heard anything like it before. The sound was accompanied by another ear-splitting bang. Instinctively I ran towards the sound. As young as I was never the one to cower, and in this situation, all I could think of were Mom and Dad. Their safety. The thought of harm befalling them was something I was trying to completely avoid. It was an exaggerated feeling of the same feeling you get when you were really young and your parents were out for a long time and your mind wanders off to the realm of what if something happened to them. It was something I chose not to think about. It took me a while to realize where I was headed. Towards the woods outside the area. Now in the woods, I was really far from home. It didn't bother me as much as it should have bothered a child my age, as I'd been very good at not getting lost. I was always good with directions. Making my way through the forest, I couldn't shake off an eerie sense of terror from my back. And soon enough that feeling solidified itself into one of true horror. The smell of gunpowder was replaced by a horrid stench even stronger than it. I looked towards it only for a pair of eyes to meet mine. The moment our eyes locked, I understood that whatever those eyes belonged to, was dead. And yes, you read it right. I said whatever. Because this was no human. The dead yet sharp eyes I was looking into were those of a fierce animal. Drool dripped down its muzzle. It was an enormous hound. No. Not a hound. A wolf. I had never seen one before in my life, but surely they couldn't have been this big. And what's stranger is that it was wearing tatters of what seemed to be clothed. It had brown boots on as well as other garments that were now ripped to shreds. Fear began to boil inside me, alongside the fluttering of butterflies in my stomach. I pushed on. And the more I worked my way forwards, the more I encountered dead bodies of these wolf-like creatures, massacred and sprawled all throughout the woods. I figured they must have been the townsfolk. Some places, I even thought I recognized some people. Had I been living in a town filled with them? What was this? Where were my parents? What was going on? Thoughts like these kept striking me over and over again until I came upon another body, and all the thoughts silenced. Everything went quiet. Even if I didn't recognize him by his facial features, I would recognize that huge scar anywhere. That scar that horizontally slashed his forehead. It was my cousin, Forehead James. My knees buckled as I started to tremble, all sense flying away from the world. Streams of tears made their way down my cheeks, tears that I didn't even know were there. I managed to mumble, "James," before breaking out into a cry. I nearly collapsed. Nearly. I had to know. Were my parents a victim of this? As little sense as it made for them to be monsters, they were still my parents. Before I moved on, I noticed something in James's scar. Something shiny and silver. I was too scared to get any closer though. I'd been walking for a while and was finally making my way out the other end of the woods. It was jarring to suddenly step out into the bright moonlight. Even so, I saw something in the distance. Two figures stood stark under the blazing moon. Two humans. Humans I knew. Mum and Dad. Subconsciously, a big smile streaked across my face as tears of utter joy flowed down like a river, and I called out to them in a big wave of relief. However, as they turned around, I saw that they were covered in blood. From head to toe. Blood and the same tufts of fur. But they weren't like those monsters. They were still themselves. They were. Dad suddenly pulled out something from behind. A gun. Unlike any I'd ever seen before. He cocked it and shot at me, point blank. I closed my eyes in a fit of panic and heard the same bang I'd been hearing all night. But nothing happened. As I opened my eyes, I noticed that Mum had deflected his arm upwards and the shot had pierced the sky. Dad looked at her, confused. She motioned towards me and said, "That jacket, oh God, Peter, no, please no." I checked my jacket, the one I'd always worn, to see what the problem was when my body froze. My hands, no, not hands. My hands, that were now paws, rested against my sides, with what looked to claw protruding from them. I looked on in dismay at the fur-covered limbs I now had as I reached to touch my face, only to find what was shaped like a muzzle, lined with sharp teeth. This can't be real. This has to be a nightmare. This has to be. My parents had walked all the way up to me and inspected mine closely. My mom was in tears, the tears mixing in with the blood and dirt on her kind face. She said my name, and I looked towards her and asked her what was happening. That only made her crying worse. My dad put a hand on my shoulders as he consoled my mom. All of us collapsed there, not knowing what to do. Even in all this madness, I felt safe. At this age, no matter what the circumstances, you always feel safe with your parents. After what seemed like an eternity, my mom finally began to speak. She explained the whole situation to me. It turns out that my mum and dad were werewolf hunters. They'd been trained since childhood and were part of a big organization that undertook this mission. They'd kind of separated from it in recent years, albeit still undertaking jobs now and then as they believed it was their destined duty which they could never run away from. They had settled down and had me. Tonight was their biggest mission yet. To blend in and then take down an entire town of werewolves. My mom had put sleeping medicine in my water to make sure I would sleep throughout the entire endeavor. However, seems like my extraordinary sense had awoken me to the sounds of those gunshots. That was the one thing they hadn't accounted for. Their son is a werewolf. The very thing they swore to eradicate. "Honey, you're a werewolf," my mom told me. And with a heavy heart, they told me that I could no longer live with them. The organization would surely find out that I was a werewolf. I cried at this, as did they. But there was nothing either of us could do about it. It seemed none of them knew about any existing cures to my condition. I was sent to live with distant relatives and haven't seen my parents in years. I hope they haven't forgotten me, as I haven't forgotten them. As sad as it was, Mom left me with a single souvenir. A parting gift to remember her by. A silver bullet.